Well, Dennis arrived at Emory, I believe, in 1976, and I was a senior graduate student, so he was a young assistant professor. So he would be here all hours of the day and night, as was I, and so we became acquainted. But really, the real interest and why I kept coming and going from Dennis's lab was his first student. There was a woman working in his lab, and I was way more interested in her than Dennis Liotta. And ultimately we were married and have been married for, well, since 1981. So we all sort of feel we're family. And over the ensuing 35 some odd years, Dennis and I worked on a lot of projects together. And of course, when he had made that major step of separating enantiomers, I at that point had moved to Burroughs Wellcome and was in the division of virology. So it was a natural thing for us to get together. Working with Dennis was very easy for me because, number one, we were friends, and two, Dennis is basically a good-hearted guy, and so he's easy to get to know and to interact with. So we formed sort of a seamless relationship between Dennis Liotta's group at Emory and the virology group at Wellcome, and we worked very, very well together in generating the data and getting the drug positioned to move into clinical studies. One of the tests was called passaging. So what you do is you grow virus up in cells. In this case it was HIV. And you put drug on them. And then you isolate virus that's been exposed to drug, and you reinfect cells and you expose it again to drug, and that's called serial passaging. And over time, populations will emerge that are resistant to the drug. Some amino acid change will occur that renders the virus insensitive, called phenotypic insensitivity. Well, that only took one passage. And we were like, oh my God, it isn't going to last a week. Furthermore, there was some evidence emerging out of lamivudine trials that were ongoing that patients were breaking through. So I think a lot of times people look at pharmaceutical companies and say, wow, they're like the Roman army. They're in a phalanx and they're all aligned. Well, that isn't necessarily true, and there was rivalry between the US and UK divisions, and they didn't hesitate to call up and tell us that the drug wasn't going to make it. So I passed that on to Dennis. But in the interim, the whole idea, out of that experience came the idea of combining drugs. The synergy between AZT in those patients and lamivudine or FTC was an enormous breakthrough. It led to the first combination drug, Combivir. That was the first fixed dose combination pill. The precedent for combining drugs against drug resistance, of course, had history in cancer, and even that early in antibiotics. So there was precedent that suggested that might be a way forward. But molecular virology was progressing, understanding of DNA and RNA sequencing was progressing, so we began to find the resistant genotypes and were able to isolate the virus. Those were big breakthroughs in those days, and that led to being able to test drugs in combination. Some of the other nucleosides that had been approved were antagonistic. When you put them in combination, they worked worse together. So yes, it was a big breakthrough when those two drugs worked synergistically. In wild-type virus, much less in resistant virus. It provided treatment for people that had exhausted their options. I think the precedent for the combination of antivirals certainly was set by Combivir. Now, no drug is approved for use by itself. They're all approved for use in combination. One of the most interesting times was being deposed in suits. patent suits. And of course I was at the heart and soul of this, and was a favorable witness for Emory. And this young woman was interviewing me, and she asked me a question: how did you become friends with Dennis Liotta? And as if it was some sort of conspiracy, starting in 1976, they have a tone, you know. And I said, well, I didn't really care about Dennis Liotta. She got a rather shocked look on her face and said, well, what do you mean? I said, hey, there was a woman up in his lab, and I was interested in her, so I had to become acquainted with Dennis Liotta. And she made a tactical error. She said, well, who is this woman? And I said, well, she's my wife. And her assistant said a 4-letter expletive. And then afterwards, I saw him. He goes, you know what? You guys are tight. This is all family. And I thought, yep, you're right.